Good afternoon. We will start in a couple of seconds just to give some time for the participants to join. Okay, good afternoon and thank you and welcome. Thank you for participating in the Asian Development Bank Knowledge Event Series on COVID-19 for Central and West Asian countries. My name is Ari Perdana from the Central and West Asian Department. This is our third knowledge event series in the COVID-19. In the first two, we talk about vaccines and health aspect of the pandemic. Today, we will talk about the other aspect of the pandemic, which is education. As we know, the pandemic has led schools across the globe to abruptly close and then switch to distant learning. According to a joint report by UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank, in April, 190 countries announced a full or partial closure of schools. And this has affected no less than 1.5 billion primary and secondary schools around the globe, and also their families. Around 70 million students are affected in the Central and West Asian region. In September, many countries have started reopening the schools, at least partial reopening. Some have announced a plan to open the schools sometimes in the future. Meanwhile, some countries like Georgia have reopened, but then reintroduced another restrictions. Of course, we are longing to have schools and classrooms back and to see our kids meet the teachers and friends and have their social life back. At the same time, we don't want to rush to reopen schools without proper plans, protocols and safeguards mechanism in place to protect students, teachers, and the families. On the other hand, this pandemic may give us some opportunity to rethink and reimagine schools, teaching, and learning process, especially how to use technology to reach out children from marginal groups. We are lucky today because two education experts from the region are joining us to share their perspectives and observations on the issues of school reopening. The first panelist or the first speaker is Dr. Nutsa Kobakhidze, Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong. Good afternoon, Nutsa.
Good afternoon, Ari and everyone.
How are you in Hong Kong?
Pretty well. It's late afternoon here.
Okay, good to hear. Dr. Kobakhidze works in comparative and international education. She had worked in several countries, Georgia, her home country, some former Soviet Union countries, recently Hong Kong, China, and then two countries in Southeast Asia, Cambodia and Myanmar. Our second speaker is Dr. Duishon Shamatov, Associate Professor in the Graduate School of Education at Nazarbayev University at Nur Sultan. Hi, Duishon. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Well, I believe it's already cold there in Nur Sultan in Kazakhstan.
It is cold and it will get even colder.
Okay, well, stay warm. Dr. Duishon Shamatov has worked in several issues on education, curriculum, teachers, learning and teachers' identity and school reforms. And he had also done some research and works in several countries, Kyrgyz Republic, his home country, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and Yemen. So this is how we will do today. I will ask several questions for the panelists, and we'll have some conversation. And after several questions, we will invite the participants to type your question in the chat box or in the Q&A box. This event is also live streamed at YouTube, and for those of you joining Zoom, you can choose to listen in the Russian translation. Okay, so let us start. My first question is to Nutsa. So as we know, Nutsa, this pandemic has created a great disturbance on education at global level. So how has it affected students, teachers, parents, and education systems in general? So what has been your observation?
Thank you, Ari, and the EDB team for inviting me as a speaker for this webinar. So I'll be talking about global forces and local responses in South Caucasus, which covers Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. I'm especially well informed about Georgia, which is my home country, and of course, Hong Kong, where I am based now. Well, as you mentioned, this COVID-19 crisis put enormous pressure on education system worldwide, including our region, and no country has been prepared to respond to this global crisis. Well, from the comparative education perspective, there are some commonalities that countries share, how they responded to COVID-19 challenges that COVID-19 created. But there are also differences, the ways countries responded. So let me share my screen to illustrate my points based on examples of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Is my share okay? So on the screen, you see graphs showing COVID cases in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So the first graph is for Georgia. It shows COVID cases from January up to December. As you see, COVID cases were quite low, and then curve was flat until about September or late summer, and it dramatically went up in Georgia. In Azerbaijan, it was flat, and they had some spike in summer, and then cases rose up in September. And in Armenia, they had some spikes in summer, and it seems that situation is improving now. All these three countries in the South Caucasus closed schools in early March. As you see, in early March, cases were really low, but these governments of these countries decided to close schools. Georgia and Azerbaijan actually closed schools virtually the same day, March 3rd, and Armenia a little bit later. And schools remained closed until about September, when Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia opened schools. But the opening was in stages, and there were differentiated approaches. They prioritized kindergartens and primary schools, and some schools and some stages of education, levels of education remained online. And then when cases rose in October, countries decided to partially close the schools. At the moment, almost all schools are closed in Georgia because unfortunately we had COVID cases related to schools. In Azerbaijan, at the moment, all schools are closed and all universities are closed. In Armenia, it's partially closed and some schools are open and some schools are implementing hybrid mode. So let's look the second slide. I don't have many slides. So the second slide shows how countries responded with what initiatives. And two commonalities between these three countries is that all of them introduced TV lessons. In Georgia, it was broadcast and is broadcast through public broadcaster. In Azerbaijan, through two different channels. In Armenia, even they opened a new educational channel to broadcast lessons for each grade. And all these countries also created e-resources portal, the portal where they uploaded textbooks or some electronic resources for teachers to download and use, and also students. In Georgia and Azerbaijan, they subscribed to Microsoft program called Teams. And in Armenia, my colleagues are telling me that they are using a variety of platforms, and Zoom is quite widespread. In Georgia, Microsoft Teams was translated in Georgian, but not only in Georgian, but also in minority languages such as Azerbaijani and Armenian. Well, we can ask questions, are these initiatives enough? The answer is not really, because there are some students who are not reached by these initiatives. And there is big gap in access to computers and internet in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So there is a big digital divide. So in terms of TV programs, the criticism in public has been around the argument that these programs are not really interactive. It's only one-dimensional. Well, recent report by UNICEF in collaboration with International Telecommunication Union, very recent in December, reported that about 15% of Georgia's school-aged population do not have access to computers and internet. Well, and these people are usually located in rural areas, and these are students from poor families. And an extra challenging has been posed with students with special needs and also ethnic minorities. And there are some disparities between private schools and public schools, and as I said, rural and urban schools. Usually, what we've seen in Georgia, at least, is that private schools responded better in terms of moving faster to online learning, teaching and learning, and public schools were a little bit behind. However, we can't really generalize because some public school teachers were more proactive and some public school principals were more proactive than the private school teachers. Well, let me stop share and move to my another point. So while we should talk about inequalities and the problems with access to computers and internet, I think we should not forget about our focus on quality of education. I think in the field of education for years, we've been talking about that enrollment doesn't mean participation, enrollment doesn't mean engagement. The fact that children are in school doesn't mean they are learning, right? And the same applies to online schools and schooling, because the fact that students are connected through Zoom or Teams doesn't mean they are engaged and they are learning. I think we should ask questions related to quality of education. What happens when students are connected? Are they really learning? Are teachers able to redesign their lessons to offer proper pedagogies, or are they just copying and pasting from the face-to-face classes? So are they teachers supported enough to adapt to online pedagogies? I think access is very important, but we should not stop only talking about access. Quality is important, quality of participation and quality of student engagement. As for the teachers, especially in the beginning of pandemic, teachers became very enthusiastic in Georgia to try new technologies, and they were trying new technologies. Even some enthusiast teachers were creating online resources, videos, and sharing on YouTube, helping each other, and posting on Facebook. These were happening early stages, as I mentioned, before government even initiated some responses. I think this is good, and this, in the end, contributed to teacher empowerment at the grassroots level. And then lastly, Ari, you asked me about parents, and I'm also a parent of two, and parents have been struggling a lot. And some middle-class parents were trying some solutions, for example, hiring private tutors. In Georgia, many parents decided to move their children from private to public schools and instead hired private tutors to cut the cost of education. So we have the Zooters, like Zoom tutors, which is really popular in Georgia. This is, again, middle-class parents because they have more resources to choose some extra educational opportunities for their children. Well, while we can't really blame parents wanting the best for their children, we should note that such initiatives, of course, do not equalize educational opportunities for all, but in turn widening the gaps and reproducing social inequalities. Harry? Harry, you are muted.
Sorry about that. Okay, Nutsa, if I get your elaboration correctly, so this pandemic has created some challenges for students and families, of course. First, it may widen the education inequality that we have observed before the pandemic. And second, it also brings up the question about quality of education. Are students really learning? Well, of course, there is online and distance learning, but are they really learning? And third, parents, families have tried to find out the support systems, and this created some market for private tutoring, which may also further widen inequality. Okay, before that, before we go into further, so let me ask Duishon. So Duishon, Central Asian countries have been able to reopen the schools. Some other countries, like here in the Philippines, are still struggling with the decision to reopen schools. So, according to your observations, what has been, how have the countries managed to reopen schools, and what have your observations about how could they reopen the schools, and what parameters are in place to ensure that students and teachers are safe?
Thank you very much, Ari. Well, I'll be sharing my observations based on my discussions with the educators of Central Asia, and my own personal professional interest, research interest is in really on these Central Asian countries. And I'll be speaking about mainly 4 countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Unfortunately, I will not be able to say a lot about Turkmenistan because I have lack of information, but I still need to mention that there is a need for conducting empirical, systematic research on this issue across Central Asia. Therefore, I will be, what I say is that it's my more personal observations. Let me also share my screen. Dear colleagues, well, Ari's question is really about reopening. Before I talk about reopening, let me give a very brief background about the situation in Central Asia. How did we really struggle with pandemic? Well, earlier at the beginning of the year, Central Asia, all these countries were just living as every year. We knew that there was some outbreak of the disease elsewhere in the world, but we thought that it doesn't really touch us. This is not about Central Asia. But when early March, when WHO announced about pandemic, I think it was a time when really some people started panicking. And actually it was the time, Central Asia, we have a lot of celebrations, especially in March. One of the public holidays across Central Asia, it's a Soviet legacy, is the 8th of March. We celebrated Women's Day as ordinary every year. But then after 8th of March, because of pandemic, governments of Central Asia announced also that all these lockdowns, strict measures. As a result, you can see that these 3 countries they closed the school and opted for online or distance education. But Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, they didn't. Turkmenistan, I don't have a lot of information, but Tajikistan, because it was the time Tajikistan was safe place in April. Only in May, Tajikistan had cases of COVID-19. Well, because these 3 countries opted for online education, but for Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, for all Central Asian countries, the timing of the outbreak was such a lucky coincidence. It took place in March when we were celebrating Nowruz holiday. It's in Central Asia, we call it different names. Like in general, it's Nowruz in Kazakhstan, Navroz in Tajikistan, and Nowruz in Kyrgyzstan. This is a spring holiday. It actually it takes place in 3 days, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. But normally, schools have holidays after third semester. And third semester is the largest semester. Normally, we have a large break, about 1 week after third semester. And this was a lockdown, was a very appropriate time because teachers were able to, at least, especially as Nutsa said, very proactive teachers were managing to learn something about online education. They were getting ready. And governments even prolonged the school break for 1 more week so that when teachers come back, at least they know how to take care of this online education. But I think during this time, schools had to really cover 2 months, April and May. And of course, they were revising the content of their schooling, and etc. So they managed, and I also like to repeat what Nutsa was saying, that a lot of, even in compared to university teachers, I felt that school teachers were very proactive, risk-taking, and many of them were not afraid of really making their video lessons and uploading to even to YouTube and using channels to share their own experience with other teachers. That's why kudos for those school teachers. But I also often a lot of credit goes to the government everywhere in the world and also international donor agencies. But I also would like to praise the individuals, just active citizens of the Central Asian countries who volunteered to do a lot of not only helping the less advantaged people with the means, with money, with the products, but also in terms of education. A lot of IT skilled, educated young people were willingly sharing their knowledge of this Zoom platform, YouTube, or how to make video lessons. They helped the other teachers by conducting webinars. This is the situation. But Ari, what happens that their main issues in Central Asia were related, of course, with the issue with the access of ICT. Internet was not available in especially remote areas, mountainous areas, and the high-speed internet. Also, at the initial stage, a lot of people were confused about what is online learning, what is distance education. Is it forcing the people to sit 100% of the time in front of the computer? So this kind of confusions were there. And parents, particularly parents, because parents were used to send their children to school and see them in the evening, and now they were in the same house and seeing how they were struggling, their kids. But I think positive side of it is that parents started getting interested in their children's education. They started noticing, okay, in the next room, my child is learning. What is he learning? So this was a positive side. But also, some parents were really very critical and negative, as if it was the invention of the government and ministry to impose online education. They were showing their resentment and the negativity, saying that, okay, you must open the school, as if it was an option. So, but I also agree with Nutsa. Heavy emphasis, heavy reliance in Central Asia was also on video lessons because TV is widely accessible. But positive sides, teachers generally are not very much respected everywhere in the world. But during pandemic, people started appreciating teachers' work, and a lot of risk-taking. Teachers started to learn, and as I mentioned, parents started to pay attention. But finally, coming back to Ari's question, not all schools opened in Central Asia. Not all of them opened in September. The reason for that was really terrible summer. Especially July was a very difficult time in Central Asia because there were a lot of casualties. Many people died, and the earlier stages of pandemic, many people were skeptical. They didn't really worry about it. Right? They were saying, this is not scientific. This is someone's invention. It's just the rumors were spreading, and people didn't really feel that it's a really serious issue. But July was a very difficult time for across Central Asia. Many people died, unfortunately. As a result, people took a lot of cautions. Parents started taking a lot of cautions when the new academic year started. So in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, schools, especially, there were provisions for the schools, private schools, but smaller schools with some, by following the protocols of the social distancing, sanitation, etc., etc. But Tajikistan, as I mentioned earlier, they didn't close the schools in May. They didn't opt for online education. The schools were closed, but with the help of international donor agencies, particularly UNICEF, Tajik schools have started, they reopened entirely all schools from mid-August. This was the situation that, but in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan nowadays, there are discussions, particularly in Kyrgyzstan, to open small schools, rural schools, and with the number, like following some kind of algorithm that they are given the provisions. And especially the grades which are very crucial, grade 1, the first time child comes to school, they are disoriented, or grade 5, when children in primary schools, they have one teacher, while in grade 5, they have several teachers. So how do we really make sure that child is not disoriented? These were the discussions. Ultimately, slowly, provisions are being made but following the protocols of sanitation, social distancing, obligatory mask wearing, checking temperature, and etc. Maybe at this, Ari, I will stop here for now.
Okay. So Duishon, thanks very much for sharing your early observation of the first move towards reopening. And I can understand that some schools have, tried to manage the reopening very carefully and not allowing all students. So maybe share your further observations and how they manage to provide education with this heavy restriction and limitations. And can we expect any moves towards a full reopening sometimes in 2021?
The question to me?
Yes.
Yeah. I think yes, but also I think many people in Central Asia became very cautious of this second wave. Unfortunately, it's again some kind of a rise in the cases of the COVID-19 in Central Asia. Therefore, there are a lot of efforts, initiatives, even governments, ministries are very committed. They want to open the schools as soon as possible, but also not jeopardizing the risk of health of the students, parents, and the teachers. But I think all the algorithms are being prepared. And as I said, schools in rural schools in Kyrgyzstan, smaller scale schools are opened, and which are fine. In Kazakhstan also, private schools, and especially primary schools, grade 1 and grade 2, they are given permission to open the schools. But those schools are opening with a parent's choice. They give a choice to parent, whether parents want to send their children to school or they want to continue with the online education. So it's up to parents, because some parents are still very cautious about it. But I think in Kyrgyzstan, there was a discussion, if Kyrgyzstani schools all will be opened, then what if some parents will be afraid to send their kids to schools? Then can they also expect that their child will be taught online? But that's a question, I think, because it requires a lot of resources and the salary of the teacher. Can a teacher, for example, teach offline and online at the same time, which would be double the amount of work? These are the things, economic reasons, we also need to take into consideration when we talk about Central Asia.
Thank you. I think you're right. So there's so many things to consider in reopening the schools. Let me now move back to Nutsa. Nutsa, like Duishon mentioned, there has been a lot of push and pull factors of this issue of school reopening. Some parents, of course, would want to see schools reopen and their kids are going back to school. Some parents and policymakers also are more cautious and trying to, and health is of course, a push factor. It's a pushback factor, and people wants to have a more cautious or even more patient approach. So again, how do you see this issue being played in different countries in Central Asia, and how to come up with a middle ground between reopening the schools and comply with the health protocols and health aspects?
Thank you, Ari. It's a good question, but it's difficult to answer given the context that we are living in, which is changing and evolving every day, and we are making decisions based on what's going on today. So we can't even predict what will be next day. Well, regarding the parents, I've never seen so much division and disagreement between parents that I'm seeing around the issue of school opening. Parents' disappointment is huge, similar to what Duishon was saying about parents in Central Asia, parents in Caucasus. We are also very, very disappointed by all kinds of decisions. Some parents have more resources at home, right? So they have more resources of babysitting, arrangements, and so on and so forth. But some parents are actually relying more on schools and to have some basic functions, right? And some even rely on schools to have food, right? And then when schools are closed, they are not even able to go to work and bring income at home, right? In Georgia, we even had the rallies by parents out in the streets in the early September protesting school closure or delayed opening. So these type of parents wanted to open the schools. Of course, we are putting pressure on the system to open the school doors and send kids to school. But I think all parents agree on one thing, that the health is most important thing. And I think when cases rose in October, November, I think parents now agree more with each other than, we need to prioritize the health. What we know from research internationally is that children are not really predominantly affected by COVID-19. I think globally it's less than 10%. But we know that children can be transmitters, and we need to protect family members of vulnerable groups and also protect our teachers some of them are in vulnerable groups and age-wise or health-wise. So, and then some school personnel as well. I think, unfortunately, in Georgia, we had these cases related to schools, COVID cases with children and with teachers as well. And I see that more and more schools were closed. And then even some cases, like in the regions, when schools remained open officially, parents decided not to send their kids. So officially it was open, but parents decided not to send their kids. So some private schools offered options, like you can send your kids to school or you can have an online option, right? So they have, again, more resources to offer options to parents. Well, Duishon was mentioning the hybrid model of the opening. I think in the future, more when we open most of the schools, will be hybrid model implemented. But this hybrid model is actually easy to say, but it's really difficult to implement. So first of all, this kind of hybrid model, which is rotation-based hybrid model, when students take turns to go to school or shifts, or maybe some subjects are online, some subjects are offline. So these are quite difficult to implement in terms of logistics and management and following the protocol. And another type of hybrid model of school opening, which is when some students are online and some students simultaneously are in classrooms, is really, really difficult in terms of technology, arrangements, and also pedagogy. I think the hybrid model will be the way to go, but we should also recognize the limits of it. You mentioned the framework, right? So I think there are lots of frameworks how to open schools, and one of them is by UNESCO, UNICEF, and World Bank. They jointly provided really good guidelines to countries and to schools, and I think we can all look into. There are some generic guidelines and some specific guidelines that countries can look into and adapt to their contexts.
Thank you. So the recent news on vaccines has brought some hope that the pandemic may subside in the next few months. Of course, some countries may have start massive vaccination. We're talking about countries that have early access to the vaccines. Some countries may not have the early access, so they may have to wait a bit longer. Or maybe it will be a staggered vaccination programs rather than a full massive vaccination programs. In short, the situation in different countries may be different. But of course, regardless, we cannot let schools or education systems continue without clarity. At one point, we need, or policymakers need to decide that education, schools, classrooms should be back. But in the meantime, what should, you know, policymakers, but also families and students, teachers and school managers need to do to ensure that education process continue with the limitations? We're talking about innovations, but what types of innovations that we can pursue or we can offer to schools and teachers? Maybe Nutsa, you want to go first?
Yeah, if Duishon wants to go first, feel free to.
Or Duishon?
Yeah. Okay, I think that there are several ideas that come to my mind. Number one, I think the back to normal reality is difficult in the nearest future. I cannot foresee that suddenly vaccine miraculously will solve everything. So I'll be a bit skeptical of it. I would like to hope, but I think, but for now, for some time, it looks like we are going to live in this unpredictable time. What can be done? I liked what Nutsa was following, the idea of this hybrid or blended education. One idea is blended education, which combines both offline and online, but offline or physical presence of the children under following all the conditions that their health will not, like all this, if it's necessary, like a social distancing or different alternative schedules, different shifts, so that there is a lot of large number of people in one place. But also one area that hasn't been tackled very well until now, it is good that in spring and in September, October, November, most teachers are learning online very fast and they are doing their best. But I think we missed the time in the summer because of this very difficult time. We missed the time for further professional development. Ideally, I would propose that online learning, online technology, use of technology that the teachers are doing is not up to the level yet. It's really basics, particularly respecting the privacy and rights of the students. Like if I make a video of my lesson, do I get the permission of my children before I upload it to the public? These are very important matters. And also, like, do teachers know how to conduct online sessions interactively? Do they know how to take care of academic dishonesty? For example, how do they know that if the assignment is not being done by someone else, by parents? So these are the measures teachers need for further professional development, particularly e-learning, because it looks like we are going to live with this online learning for a while. But if the schools will come back one day, I would like still to believe that we should, I think, particularly I come from Kyrgyzstan originally. Kyrgyzstan announced that 2020 would be the year of digitization. And the Central Asian countries were talking about digitization for a while, but it was a lot of discussions only. But this pandemic, I hate to say that about positive things inside the pandemic, but we need to say still about some positives. But one thing that it's acceleration of the people's knowledge of ICT, particularly in education, has been remarkable. In this area, I think I am very happy that people are now, even parents from remote areas, they are using the language such as Microsoft Teams or Zoom. They're using it, which means that 1 year taught a lot of things to us. So I would be happy if these things, we do not miss out or we do not neglect our learning from this time. And even when normal time comes back, we still use some of the best experience from this.
Okay, thanks, Duishon. So basically, this is an opportunity to speed up our understanding of how ICT in education works, basically. Yep. Okay, Nutsa, same question. What can we do now in the meantime?
Yeah, I agree with Duishon that we missed the time during summer. So I know that at least in Georgia, there have been some teacher training programs going on, but I think we don't need one-time teacher training programs, right, online. We need ongoing teacher training programs to ensure that teachers really know what they're doing in terms of pedagogy. I'm myself a teacher at the university, and I was using this online technologies even before the pandemic. But even for me, it's quite difficult, right, to have a lecture with all interactive platforms using different applications. And then teachers in rural areas, of course, they need ongoing support, more support. So we need more teacher training. And missing step sometimes is to educate teacher educators. I think they are very important people to educate teacher educators. Well, Ari, in the title of our webinar, it's a word reimagining, right? And I think pandemic is pushing us to reimagine education, re-examine education. And I see this word everywhere, right? Because first of all, pandemic pushing us to reflect about the aims of education. And then also we see that education is changing. The mode of delivery is changing, pedagogy is changing, mindsets are changing, assessment methods are changing, curriculum goals are changing. So, and then we need to think creatively how to use this opportunity. As Duishon was saying, like, yes, there were some positive points that pandemic has brought. So, and we need to capitalize on that. While we are thinking about future and imagining, we should also pay attention to the immediate needs of students and parents and teachers, especially. We should recognize mental health crisis among students and teachers, and especially those ones who lost their loved one due to COVID. I think government should invest in creating social safety nets and infrastructure to support teachers and students inside the schools and outside the schools. Well, in your question, you asked what can be done, right? What government can do, or the schools, right? There are lots of things, and I think when we all safely return to school, there will be a need for programs like remedial programs, like recovery programs to help our students to catch up their grade levels. But before such programs, I think we need a good assessment to see where we are in terms of academic achievement, right? So what are the gaps and how can cover this gap successfully? So we need to also invest in low-tech solutions and low-cost solutions. So we are only talking about the Zoom and Teams, but we should recognize that there is no magic hand that we can give computers to everyone and access everywhere, right? So it will be really difficult. And we know that even in really developed countries, they've been struggling. I'm based in Hong Kong. It's a very resourceful place, but we had students that did not have really access to computers, or there was only one computer at home where multiple children and their parents were also needing computers. So I think this is quite a global problem. So we need to invest in low-cost solutions, some kind of systems which can have really good functionality offline, right? So the system that can work on basic mobile phones, podcasting or sending text messages creatively, or audio, which is easier than given access to fully online resources. Well, crisis is also opportunity, right? Never waste a good crisis. And we need to ask ourselves, what are the opportunities that this pandemic has given us? And one of them is the use of ICT, right? So we need to capitalize on this kind of online benefits of online education. In Georgia, some schools developed quite innovative and creative approaches during the COVID-19, such as virtual excursions, creative projects, movie clubs, online drama, and merging subjects together to offer some multidisciplinary approaches to subjects. I think this is all good. And for the governments, I see the governments are investing a lot in buying the instruments or access or license, but less on teacher preparation and training. I think we should invest more to support teachers and teacher educators. I mean, one of the things that comes in my mind is that pandemic allowed us to have events like this, right? open access events that everyone from the region and outside region interested in education can listen to. And so perhaps like me, you are also overwhelmed by the number of such events and webinars, and you don't have time to follow all of them. So what this brought is it democratized knowledge because it gave everyone access to knowledge, which maybe before was only a privilege of some. So I think knowledge exchange seminars and webinars like these are the good sides of pandemic that we are experiencing.
Thank you. That's very excellent points. And we have received some questions already from the audience. And first question comes from Marina Ushveridze. It's a bit long, but the points are very important. So I would like to invite Marina to speak maybe directly. Can you unmute yourself? Or can you, our team, help Marina to unmute?
Sounds like Georgian.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
Marina.
So first of all, thank you. Thanks a lot to the both presenters for your interesting presentations. So shall I ask the question now here? The question which I wrote?
Yes, please.
Yes. So I'll try to be brief. One problem that we're facing, and not only us in Georgia, but many countries of the world, is not enough access to technologies for some students and teachers, like internet, computers, smartphones. But another problem, and not little problem, is the deficiency of interaction with the peers, with the school community, and this actually quite severely affects mental health and well-being of our students. That's what the question is about. At least in Georgia, and I'm sure in many other countries of the world, it has not been forbidden to arrange open space meetings with the students. This could be work on different class projects. This could be open air presentations by students of their projects, or sports events, any other events, following all rules of physical distancing and for the prevention of COVID. It could be visits to the schools once a week, maybe meetings in the schoolyard, but still keeping students in touch with the school, which has not been happening, at least here, for many months and many weeks. So my question was, did any schools in other countries in organized manner use this approach? Not some schools as their own initiative, but if you have observed any examples of systematic approach in schools in other countries, because I think this could help students to somehow feel better connected to the school and also have more motivation to learn, because now it's only the screen. In many cases, videos are off, the microphones are muted, and in many cases, students are in the lesson, but actually they're not participating. So that's my question. If any countries have done any systematic efforts to make students more connected to the schools, following all COVID-19 prevention rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina.
Before I go to Nutsa, I think this question is similar to the one addressed by Rusudan Chanturia, which I believe is also from Georgia. Online mode has been extremely challenging for primary grade students, especially 1 to 2nd graders. I agree. Is there any specific good practice or experience in this regard to address these challenges? We'll go to Nutsa first, and then Duishon, I hope you can also come up with your observations.
Yeah, thank you, Ari. I mean, both Marina and Rusudan asked very good questions. I mean, especially as a parent, I experienced this challenge, right? So I agree with Marina that students in all ages need to meet and interact somehow. right? Because schooling has this social function. So schooling is not only to learn academic things, but it's to socialize and meet with peers, right? It's very good for their well-being and mental health, and it was suspended. Well, I know that there have been some initiative regarding outdoor classrooms, for example, and I remember one school in Georgia, in the Kuri municipality, also, or if I'm not mistaken, organized outdoor classes in September in a safe space. I remember some articles about India also implementing some outdoor classrooms. I think now it's winter, so it will be quite difficult to meet outside. I mean, it's really warm in Hong Kong, and kids can meet in the parks, fortunately. But in Central Asia, I know it's very cold. In Georgia, it was snowing recently. It's really difficult to meet outdoors, right? Marina asked if there are any systematic approaches. Well, as far as I know, not the systematic policies by the countries, but it's been more like initiatives of parents and families to organize play dates, informal play dates, of course, between classmates and friends. Maybe in Central Asia, I don't know, Duishon.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead, Duishon.
Can I? Yeah, I know that I can tell that I was mentioning earlier also. In Kyrgyzstan, there was a provision eventually for grade 1 students to, and also for small scale schools which are smaller than 300 children, in small size. In Kazakhstan, also private schools, they allowed first grade 1, then grade 2 schools children also to come to school. I also support the idea that it's very important for kids to get together, to learn, to develop their social skills. Extremely important. They need to be able to develop their teamwork skills also. But one country I want to give example here. Maybe I will just briefly show my slide if Ari allows me. Tajikistan has done. I was mentioning earlier. Tajikistan didn't go for online education. They didn't go entirely for distance education. They just closed their school in May, early May. They closed the school when outbreak of the virus took place, but then they started school in the middle of August. But before opening the school, very good preparation was done together with the international donor agencies, but the government efforts also. I know some colleagues from Tajikistan are also sitting here in this meeting. Maybe they can also say their ideas, but all the precaution measures were done even before children comes to school. What things need to be done when kids come to school? What are the measures? All this sanitation, checking temperature, and teachers were trained, educated about it, that all the time they're wearing masks. During school hours, there were some algorithm, there were rules which were strictly maintained, even like hand washing, the time indicated, in disinfection, and even shifts. And after schools, without masks, not to go to your house, directly go to your house. All these instructions were given. As a result, kids were able to see each other, but they were able to work. This is in Tajikistan. But other countries are developing their strategies. But in addition to what I said in response to my colleagues from Georgia, one way, of course, this is not a solution, this is not alternative, but one way, very good teachers, creative teachers, what they do is that even with the online education, they are assigning group assignments, like students get together in the Microsoft group and talk to each other. They may not physically see meet with each other, but they do the project together. I know this is not a solution, but this is somehow, even they're finding the creative ways to address the issue. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I may add, Ari, I missed the point earlier when I was talking about these initiatives that Georgia as a country initiated to respond to the challenges. I forgot to mention development partners such as UNICEF and also other civic society organizations, local NGOs, private sectors. Rusiko asked question, and I know that the organization she's representing has done a lot to support ethnic minority population in schools and in terms of teacher training and translating Microsoft Team in, as I said, in minority languages, Azerbaijani and Armenia. And then ADB was also helping, and thank you ADB, and investing in education sector in Georgia. So we should not really forget about that. And similar to Central Asia, I think Georgian teachers, we are very active online. Like about 60% of Georgia's population is using Facebook. It's very popular social media platform, and they were creating, the groups, and I was involved in some of them, and so I liked how they were collaborating, and this is towards the creating professional learning communities online. So the pandemic was pushing them to, develop professionally, but not through the official programs, but just as a community.
I think your elaboration similar to what has been asked by our colleague Stephen Bari. Is to see teachers are taking initiative to develop their own materials and activities using online platform. How can international organizations like ADB, alongside government, central and local, support teacher agency, especially in the rural areas and remote areas, in localizing curriculum, providing inquiry-based activities, and exploiting accessible technologies such as cell phones? So maybe you want to adding to the points?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I think earlier Duishon mentioned the need for research, right? And then we need to, first of all, research what is going on. And I'm not saying even in Georgia. So we need comprehensive studies to evaluate this sudden shift to remote education or online education. I think we need to know what are the best practices that these teachers, that Stephen is talking about, right? Good initiatives, good practices by some teachers from Tbilisi or from remote regions are doing, to have good examples to build on these good practices after pandemic. So, but first of all, we need the research, and we as practitioners and scholars, we also need to have access to the data. And I'm not saying that data are released by the government. So I think perhaps we need to encourage governments to provide more data on how many students are left behind, how many of them have access to particular technologies, to have better picture, right? It's hard to say. So we know some from anecdotal experiences, anecdotal stories, but we need more comprehensive studies to better respond to Stephen's question.
Thank you. Duishon, yes, please.
This is a brilliant question. Thank you, Stephen. Well, my response will be a little bit more critical in terms of whether reform initiative people, whether national, local, or international, or donor agencies. Sometimes we become over enthusiastic and bringing our solutions and throwing at the teachers to implement, because teachers are teachers. We develop it and you must do this. I would like to really take it back and say that, okay, this is a very good opportunity for us to ask those teachers who are working in remote areas what kind of creative solutions they're finding, what they are doing before we tell them do this. And I think this is really helping them to reflect on their own practices, because it would be very sad to see if teachers started being dependent on the externally developed solutions. That would be disaster. Therefore, I would be happy if teachers, we do not lose their autonomy, do not lose their creativity. Of course, they need the support, but support should not come, okay, you don't know anything and I am supporting you. Thank you.
Yeah, may I follow up, Ari, if we have time? I think absolutely. So what I'm seeing globally and locally in my region, in Hong Kong, in Georgia, is that pandemic, and in China, that pandemic accelerated involvement of private sector in education. And we see these solutions pushed by edtech companies. While this is good, of course, to have more options to teachers, but sometimes this agenda is pushed too much. We need to, so EdTech is good, but sometimes in EdTech, there is more tech than education. So we need to strengthen education part of EdTech than just to see the commercial interest. I see huge commercial interest that they want to actually use pandemic as a good excuse to enter into public schools and initiative things like, oh, we have a solution, right? So we need to perhaps safeguard our teachers and public education from such kind of commercial interest. So EdTech is good, but technology should never be the end. It should be the mean. The end should be what is best for education, the aims of education and the needs of our students and teachers.
That's a good point. I see that there is a question from Hurmat and also Begzot. If I may, I want to save the two questions for the end because it's going to be leading to our concluding points. I hope that's okay, Hurmat and Begzot. But there is also another question from Kathy Netravelli. I think this is about assessment and how to protect the integrity of results, especially like I think Nutsa, you brought it earlier, and also Duishon, to ensure that the exams are being done by students, not the parents, for example. So yeah, the questions are just read it. Are you aware of any new assessment tools that some schools or countries have come up with to access the quality of online learning? What are some ways in which schools can ensure the integrity of assessment? Okay, Duishon or Nutsa, who wants to this question?
Okay, I can go. But assessment is most challenging, I think, to talk about, and we can talk about assessments and exams to go to universities and how to assess progress. And I think it has been very challenging, right, to develop policies to assess students properly using online platforms. And then I know that in some countries, they even had to develop some policies against contract cheating. So there was a big topic in Australia, in other countries. And we know that some countries such as Australia and the UK, they are moving away from canceling exams, for example, right? They try to redesign and at least pause. So perhaps we also need to think about how to assess what are the proper methods. And perhaps this is a good time to rethink about the formats of assessment and exams. So to use this opportunity to design more, the better exams, and in terms of context and in terms of methods as well. So, Duishon?
Yeah, similar to what Nutsa said, different school systems are developing their own approaches. Even the schools of rural, teachers of the rural schools, you can find a lot of creative teachers. They are trying to really, not at a policy level, but on individual level, they develop their own practices. But maybe on a policy level, I know that in Kazakhstan, there is a very strong school education system, Nazarbayev intellectual schools, 20 schools across the country. And these schools are developing these academic rule policies, academic integrity policies, which are implemented, that all the students know that it should, the individual work, it should be their own work, and they're accountable for that. And even during this examinations, they will be sitting with their videos on to make sure that it's their own work rather than someone else helps them. But in the rural schools, I know that in Kyrgyzstan particularly, a lot of creative teachers, what they do is that they are using just a WhatsApp cell phone, and particularly services of WhatsApp, to get the answer directly from the student, if necessary with a video. I know this is not universal, and but I think this is, we are still discussing it, and I know that in other countries, like in Pakistan, I have colleagues who are working on e-assessment or assessment of e-learning, and I think probably we can get some resources from the colleagues who are already doing this assessment. But I think in Kazakhstan, even before pandemic, there was a emphasis on criterion-based assessment. And I know that when you do criterion-based assessment, it's much easier to assess individual performance of the student. Like in our university, for example, what we do is that, of course, this is not a school. In the university, all the students, when they come, they are introduced about their own work, that if they are caught with cheating, etc., if it is a severe violation, all the penalties are indicated in the code of conduct. So, and this is a good opportunity because it's the first time. I think educators like us, we need to further develop our approaches, strategies for really, how do you assess online now? Situation is different. The child is not in front of you. What are the best ways? I think this area is still to be developed.
Thank you. We have two final questions from the audience. Well, there is another information from our colleague Nilufar Nurtuvesa. Under SDCC RETA, there is an ongoing study in a number of AUB. Thank you very much for the information. I see that Hurmat is raising a hand and already typed a question. So Hurmat, maybe you can just quickly phrase your question verbally. Would you like to do that?
Thank you very much, Ari Perdoni, and thank you for the very great presentations of the situation overall, particularly in Central Asia, Dr. Duishon. And for Tajikistan, I just wanted to give a very short example, as Dr. Duishon already mentioned, but just more about how we've been working hard together with the development partners, and I'm being working now for UNICEF, and you highly mentioned that this is being pushed hard together with the Ministry of Education and partner agencies like EU, USAID, Aga Khan Foundation, and other donors, as to how we introduce the distance learning or digital learning solutions. And given the situation and the context and the capacity within the country, it's been quite challenging to introduce it very rapidly. So there were several steps and many activities prior to that, like rapid needs assessment conducted, which identified that only 15% of schools teachers have access to internet. So it's all about not only introducing it, that's a very easy job, and also developing the applications or platforms. It's more about the connectivity. It's more also about the availability of necessary devices and the ICT capacity, as you mentioned. So I fully agree and support our colleagues' notes. And the good thing is about the reimagining education is how now we bring together all these players, important players together, including government, state, and private sector. A lot of work is going on, and we're being very carefully now introducing all these innovations. The good thing is that schools are open here in Tajikistan, but we're still working to provide and make available the distance blended digital learning platforms as an alternative solution in case of there is any interruption with education access to the resources, right? Thank you very much for this opportunity. Actually, this is a great event. So well done. Thank you.
I would like to combine Hurmat's questions and points with points raised by Begzot, or questions actually raised by our colleague Begzot Jalilov. What are three main lessons learned from COVID-19 for decision makers to invest in the sector, in the education sector, to strengthen schools' resilience to similar shocks in the future? So maybe by these two questions, I would like also to invite both Duishon and Nutsa to provide the final points, the closing points. So given what we have discussed, given what we have heard from our participants, what are your closing thoughts in these issues?
Duishon?
Okay. Well, my closing thoughts, situation, I think it's an unpredictable situation, but from this discussion, as well as from all the discussions previously, we know that this is not only Central Asia, and I am hearing many things that our Georgian colleagues, Nutsa is mentioning, also other Georgia colleagues are mentioning that very similar things are happening elsewhere in the world. And I think it's a time when really to reflect again. And one thing that the governments are really reflecting on this currently, and these are some of the lessons from myself particularly, is that this in the times of crisis, in the times of pandemic, online education is used as an instrument. Online education is not an imposition, but at the same time, online education has many faults also. It doesn't cover many aspects, as excellent colleague from Georgia mentioned, that online education does not cover many humane touch aspects. So we need to find alternatives for that. We should not neglect that. In addition to that, online education, especially ICT, my colleagues, ICT should not be a gatekeeper between a child and the knowledge. We should not be providing education for those ones who have computer and who knows how to use computer. Online education, any opportunity child should be getting knowledge. There should not be any boundary for that. And we need to think about it seriously. Otherwise, I think this disparity, layers of the people who have access to knowledge, layers of the people who don't have access, unfortunately, it will go further grow. Maybe I will just finish my closing remarks with a positive thinking. Otherwise, I think during pandemic, there were a lot of experts who were coming to tell that, oh, this education loss is going to be crucial and it will be very bad and you are going to suffer, you are going to die. I will just say positively, dear colleagues, yes, things are difficult, but I will use the phrase of my professor, Michael Fullan, who was a dean of the University of Toronto OEZ. His word, he has a lot of fancy words, but one of them is that problems are our friends, my colleagues, my friends. Problems are our friends. It may sound very like it's a paradox. Why problems are our friends? Pandemic never is going to be our friend. But what problems are our friends, I want to paraphrase is that we need to look at every crisis as an opportunity. We don't have a choice. This crisis or any crisis, this should be looked as an opportunity to find creative solutions. And with that, our kids also need to develop skills to be creative, to find future solutions for future problems. And the online education, one more thing I forgot earlier to mention, should not be also segregating the subjects. More important subject, less important subject. We can teach this subject, which this subject is not important. So we need to really reimagine, rethink, and really think about our children. What kind of education we are giving our children because of pandemic, because of online education? What we are missing out? This is time for reflection, dear colleagues, and I'm happy to do it together with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Duishon. I think that's a very good quote. The problems are our friend. Nutsa, your closing thoughts?
Thank you, Ari and Duishon. I would like to pick up where Duishon left off and pick up his positive spirit. Well, everyone is talking about learning loss, lost generation, or educational catastrophe, especially media like such apocalyptic language. I think it's not true to say that students are not learning when they are not in school. Education is not confined within the formal structure of kindergarten and schools and universities, but it extends to the family life, social media, or daily conversations. We need to ask question, what is the purpose of education? For years, long time in education, we've been talking about schools that prepare students for future, that learning from real life is really important. And this is happening now. And then we can actually take advantage of it. What students are learning now when they are not in school, and some of them even do not have access to online schools, right? They are learning about human life. They are learning about non-human existence, such as virus that can be very strong. They are learning about importance and limits of science. Perhaps they are also learning about citizenship and global citizenship. they're becoming more independent and more resilient and more adaptive, which I'm seeing here and elsewhere. So they are picking up some soft skills, which are also very important. They are learning about importance of hygiene and social distancing, and parents also, they are learning about their children, and then they are having close look into what education is and how schools and universities are managing it. So I think pandemic is pushes us to think about education beyond academic achievement and content knowledge. Perhaps this is the positive side of the pandemic.
Thank you,
Thank
Nutsa.
you very much. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed discussion with Ari and Duishon, with you guys and everyone, and thanks for excellent questions and the invitation to be a speaker. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Nutsa. We thank you very much for your time, and also to close this discussion with a positive note. I think we are enough to listen to some gloomy observations or predictions, but let's think positively. And that brings us to the end of our discussions. We hope that this discussion will give us some takeaways to bring home over the Christmas and New Year's break. Once again, I would like to thank Nutsa and Duishon for their time, for their perspectives, for their enthusiasm in this subject. I would also like to thank all participants in Zoom and YouTube for joining in. The recording of this event will be made public, will be made available in a few days. Please check your email. I would like also to thank the two interpreters, Sophia and Yana, for today for an excellent job. And for the team behind the screen, there is Laziza, Elliot, and also Hani, and the ADB team that joining us today. Thank you very much, and we wish you happy holidays, and let's hope for a brighter 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, and best wishes to all of you.